Hi, this is Born in 62, I'm Henrik Jøs. Today we're going to look at the front raise. I've talked about that exercise before, but we are going to do an extreme version, using partial reps, using heavy weights, and trying to attack the front delt from another angle than we usually do. As I've said before when I talked about the dumbbell version, one of the problems is that the first part of the motion, where you lift your hand up here, there's almost no resistance, and you have to use extremely heavy weights to get any kind of resistance down here in the first part of the movement. And as you raise your arm, the vector here becomes longer, and therefore it will be this position, the contraction up here, that determines how heavy you can go. So in order to choose a dumbbell you can lift up to this position, you will use something that is very light down here. If we use cables, we can overcome this a bit because a cable offers constant resistance, but still, because of the mechanics and because of the way the fibers are arranged in our front delt, this is the harder part of the movement. We cannot substitute these. We have to do front raises either with dumbbells or cables in order to isolate the front delt, and we have to do a full contraction up to at least this point. General consensus is if you lift higher than that up to this point, the trapezius will take over much of the action. But still, I think there is an idea in doing front raises up to a point higher than your eyes, but in most cases people do them to this point. But today we are after the other end of the range of motion, the start. If I stand up like this with a dumbbell in my hand and I try to get some action back here, I'll actually use my rear delt to lift the weight backwards, and that's a fine rear delt exercise, but it will do nothing for my front delt. And as I move my arm forward, it will just be gravity pulling it forward, not any kind of muscle action. And then we have the same problem just discussed, that the first part of the movement, because of the very short vector between the gravity line and our shoulder, there will not be much resistance, even if I use very heavy weights. But if I sit down at an incline bench, I can actually get resistance from this point and pull my arm forward. So if you do dips or bench dips and you think you lack strength in the bottom position of the movement, this will be a great way to train that strength. Also, it will be a great way to develop your front delts. So if you've always done presses or front raises the traditional way, what you can get here is actually some of that beginner stuff you had once you started out. You know, beginners always develop a lot of muscle the first 6 months or so because the muscle have never been trained before, and suddenly when they're trained, a lot of stuff happens and they see muscle growth and development. After that, things kind of slow down and stagnate, and you have to struggle and do a lot of variety to get the muscles to continue to grow. But if you never trained your front delt in this position back here, because you've never done dips or your shoulders hurt when you do dips, this is a great opportunity, and you can actually mimic that growth spurt you can get as a beginner, because if you have never trained your delt in this position, hey, there's something new. The fibers that will work down here are pristine, almost virgin-like, so there's something to get here. So what I'll challenge you to do is to try this version. You still have to do your presses, your traditional front raises, lateral raises, and so on. But if you end your shoulder workout with this version every time, I'll promise you that in 3 or 4 months' time, you will see new development in your front delt. But let's see the exercise. I'm going for really heavy weights, much more than I can lift when I do normal front raises. And I'm going for partials. What I'll also do is a jump, meaning that once it's impossible for me to do any more reps with 20 kilos, I'll go down to 15 kilos to further stimulate the muscle to growth. So, picking up the weights, sitting back here, and then lift them and forward. And that was it really. 2 or 3 sets at the end of your shoulder workout. That should do the trick. When I come up to a position where I can't move the dumbbells any further, I try to hold it there just for a little bit, so it's not a swing where I just come up and down again, but I'm just trying to hold on to it for a little moment to get a good contraction in that position. Write me if anything is unclear, if you disagree, if you have another way to do this, or write me anyhow if you want to see something else. I'll be back next week. Hi.